And to continue this conversation on the blight of empire and endless global war, particularly with respect to Gaza, I'm honored to welcome to the show my dear friend, all around superheroine, Abby Martin. Hey, Abby.
Hi, Peter. Amazing to be on. Thank you so much.
And I want to go ahead and start by saying you've relentlessly and reliably, incredibly, and very effectively been a communicator on the subject of the U.S. empire, from your investigative journalism that's gone on for years to your wonderful films. And just a quick, brief introduction. How did you end up where you are now?
It really started with Iraq and 9/11, Peter. A lot of your films actually solidified my awakening and radicalization. And I find it kind of sad that that word radicalization has become a negative connotation because for me it was radicalizing my entire being. Everything that I thought I knew was obviously turned upside down, especially just blissful ignorance living in suburbia. I mean, as a white American from an upper middle class family, and then kind of just being awakened to the fact that my government would maliciously lie to invade, occupy another country, would lie about a terrorist attack, to manufacture consent for horrific policies that subjugate and oppress tens of millions of people around the world. So the confluence of so many things, when I was a freshman in college, that juxtaposed with the fact that I was at an institution, San Diego State, that San Diego has five military bases. It's the biggest, most entrenched militaristic kind of city in the country, surprisingly so. So all of that together, I just felt like I was alone. I was totally atomized and isolated in my views. And I just started agitating and organizing against the Iraq War. Of course, through that, Peter, I think the journey is a long one. And it took me a little bit to realize that the media was complicit, that the Democratic Party was complicit. So it started off as Bush was evil incarnate. It turned into, oh my God, Nancy Pelosi, why are you doing this? To, oh my God, the media institution is part of the state apparatus. It's all part of the same system of oppression and control. It's simply an extension, an appendage of the state, and it's activated whenever they do need to dumb us down and manufacture consent for this horrific foreign policy. So akin to and true to what Martin Luther King said, that the more we spend on our military, we're approaching spiritual death. And Peter, nothing domestically can be uncoupled with the 1.5 trillion in real spending that we are spending on death and destruction under our global capitalist imperialist model.
Yeah, it really is an incredible machine that has continued to slosh along, and the media, which we'll talk about a bit more in a moment, this sort of confluence of values, right? It's such a unique intersection of forces. Because if it wasn't for the media in all of these situations, the public might start to deviate in its thought process. And you think that in the United States, with the specter of free, independent media, you would see a little bit more power in that regard. And that certainly speaks to what we've been watching in Palestine and Gaza. And speaking of that, let's jump into that a little bit. I think it was like a couple months after October 7th last year, I was on your show Empire Files. And since that time, many, many months later, well over a year later, the relentless campaign of destruction and horror has only accelerated with impunity. As of now, the total deaths on paper are about 54,000, with statistical projections that are 3 to 4 times higher at a minimum. Injured is at 121,000, which I'm sure is also low. And we're not talking about cuts and bruises here. We're talking about lost arms and legs, quality of life destroyed, mostly children. Hospitals building into this ultimate genocide, without a doubt, have been strategically targeted, with 94% damaged or destroyed, according to the WHO, which is, again, there's a conservativeness there. And even those that are still deemed operational have virtually no resources because of the embargo. And as far as the infrastructure, I guess they say about 40% of the buildings remain in Gaza, which, okay, you're like, oh,
I don't know where they are.
yeah, I know, right?
I haven't seen them.
And even if they're there, the entire infrastructure is destroyed. Electricity is gutted. The water is polluted, if running at all. It's a near total blackout, with the exception of the gas generators that are probably relegated mostly to the few hospitals that do remain in some operation. And then to build into this framework of the obvious ethnic cleansing and genocide, the journalists. There's hundreds of journalists that have been killed, which I'm sure is sensitive to you as a journalist yourself, most of them Palestinian. But there's also these massive blackouts of any media that's attempted to report the truth, which is rare enough in and of itself. So the stats just go on and on. revealing the true nature of what Israel is doing, and as we both know, has been planning to do all along, not in some stumbling thing that it's a periodic farce that they're like, oh, well, here's this new ceasefire, or I mean, like the ICC has literally have an arrest warrant for Netanyahu, but yet where are the arms embargoes? Where are the actual sanctions against Israel? Like where is the international community? Not to mention, going back to media once again, which is completely in concert with this incredible double standard and bias, where is the media simultaneously? What can we say about this incredible impunity that Israel continues to have after 600 plus days?
I think you just laid out the situation, the kind of apocalyptic reality that we are all watching. Because I can only compare this to the Holocaust because of the industrialized nature of the slaughter and the scale and scope of it. And of course, the genocidal intent that's laid bare. This is all documented. But what's so fascinating and disturbing is that addition of that high technology that we can all watch, like, I mean, tuning into, Germany in 1935, and you can just see like a window into that. And there's nothing that Black Mirror or any dystopian sci-fi horror movie would show that is worse than what we are actually living through, Peter. We already know that Gaza was uninhabitable, deemed so by the UN because of a lack of potable water alone back in 2018. They were saying 2020 Gaza would be completely uninhabitable. You cannot live somewhere with poison water. That was already most of the illnesses and bacterial infections and everything was because of the infected water, because Israel continuously would bomb the only water desalination plant in the Gaza Strip. So right now, I mean, 19 months into this, it's incomprehensible. Peter, we have talked about this like till we're blue in the face, because I feel like for me, I lean on you as someone who can understand like human psychology and how this happened, not just how we poison ourselves and how capitalism is reigned supreme. No, how humanity can collectively bear witness to this and turn the other cheek and turn away. And for me, and I know that you started off, making the Zeitgeist trilogy, it's like if people just knew. That was my entire life's mission and goal. If people just knew the information, if they just knew that they were being lied to, surely everything would change. People would become activated and mobilized. And that's all you can do is put the information out there and hope that people can use it to their best ability. That's not true. I don't believe that anymore, Peter. I think the system, global capitalism, it is dumbed us down to such an extent that I don't even think that people even know what the capacity is to be human, to have empathy. And I know it's a rat race, and I know that 60% of Americans don't even have a penny in savings. I get that. But there's something innately wrong.
There were periods of time where humans didn't really behave like this. It took the infrastructure, the structure, and the incentives that go along with it and everything else that we've created, I would argue, through the development of market capitalism, as you pointed out as well. I mean, it's trying to sound oversimplistic when we talk that way, because there's lots of intersecting factors, and they build upon themselves. The disease rises, and eventually even the root causality starts to become lost, and the sickness starts to take on an increasing life of its own. But we do know that if you condition people a certain way, as all major political hegemonic, figures have proselytized throughout the years, you just have to tell people something over and over again. You just have to put them in a condition essentially of fear when it comes to war. And these things seem to unfold like clockwork. And groupism, too. That's the worst to me. Like, for example, going back to Palestine, if I see one more headline that's talking about the jubilation of this family that got their hostage back in Israel, and it's a front page, New York Times, I'm like, seriously? Yeah, great. But what about the families that are wiped out every single day?
I mean, the whole thing is so perplexingly bizarre, Peter. And I remember asking you when all this started, I said, surely, I don't even know, I think it was pre-genocide, but I always lean on you for your opinion. And you were just like, Abby, people will get conditioned to utter degradation. Like the acclimation to degradation will continue. And the conditioning and the groupthink, and it just because people are economically down doesn't mean that you're just going to be automatically awakened of, the structures of oppression. No, it's actually more likely that you will get captured into these easier brackets, the right wing rhetoric capturing people talking about legacy media or fake news. I mean, because the right wing is actually trying to capture that audience, unlike the Democratic Party, it's working. They understand the disaffected young white youth, that are looking for some sort of political answers or orientation. Because and of course when hate JD Vance all you want, but they are talking about poor people in Appalachia. I've never even heard any Democratic Party official literally saying the word poor people. Like they actually ignore that poor people exist or homelessness. It's only like an aside as an annoyance. But back to Palestine, I mean, back to the media, Peter, what was really fascinating at this point, I don't think anyone can claim ignorance per se, but there is a really fascinating poll that came out through Pew, I think back a year ago, I think it was April of 2024, that showed that half of Americans didn't know if more Israelis had died than Palestinians in the entire conflict. Whose fault is that?
Yeah.
And what would have happened if the media didn't bury the lead, didn't make painfully constructed haikus to absolve Israel of their crimes, didn't have, you know, the basically telling their journalists, delineating them that you can't say occupation, you can't say ethnic cleansing, you can't say the word genocide, you can't say the word Palestine at the New York Times. So literally working to absolve Israel real time as they document these crimes. If it weren't for the Palestinian journalists, I shudder to think what people would even be saying about what we're witnessing, Peter. And the Palestinian journalists have taken, they've sacrificed themselves because putting on that press jacket every day, they knew that they were making themselves a target. I have never seen such brazen slaughter. I have never seen such genocidal bloodlust on display with the complete gaslighting of the entire political and media establishment. It is schizophrenic. It is crazy. I mean, that the shooting of those two Israeli embassy workers, the shock and horror, and everyone was so up in arms about the fact that, oh my God, how are people actually taking to violence? It's like, are you kidding? First of all, we have been so desensitized that every day I log on and I see a baby shredded apart. What the hell do you think that does to people? So yeah, what's surprising to me is that things like this don't happen every day, Peter.
I completely agree. Going back to the poor gentleman that set himself on fire, you see that internalization, and people just can't handle it. It's like the most normal people are the sickest, and those that really feel the sensitivity, that snap, are considered the crazy ones. And obviously, no one condones violence, but the double standard is just so outrageous, and the way that, for example, the ultimate excuse of Hamas as baby eating Hamas, and Hamas is the one lying about everything. Hamas. I don't understand how people don't recognize the most fundamental history of all of this. Hamas didn't come out of nowhere. Hamas, I think, originated around 1987. They were a response, and they were even funded by Israel in countering to the Palestinian Authority, but that's another subject. And so they come in, they're elected because if you're a Palestinian, you're living in an open air prison. Like these decades and days, the Nakba of 1948 unfolding. And what? People just expect there not to be some kind of rebellion of the people in the prison on the coastline? It is shocking to see the lack of, again, the double standard, but also lack of realism when it comes to when people think about violence and this so-called terrorist threat against Israel. It's not a terrorist threat against Israel. It's far more complicated than that. It's literally a rebellion of oppressed people. And I don't understand how that conversation can't be put forward. And again, we go back to the media, every single president, it's just the standard rote. He's like, oh, Hamas is evil. Oh, we can't recognize Hamas. The standard lobbying of Israel has created this incredible, incredible narrative. And to this day, it's pervasive and the ultimate excuse. Going back to what I said earlier, I just can't believe it resorts back to that. If I hear one more person say the war against Israel and Hamas, it's not a war. First of all, it's not a war. When's the last time somebody in Israel actually got killed and the 50 to 100 people being slaughtered in Gaza every day? You can just see the numbers. Where's the war? So anyway, I could
A
rant.
war against an army with ragtag weaponry that has no air force, no airport. I mean, it's unrelenting. Peter. I mean, it's unbelievable. Like you were saying, I mean, you've had such great things to say about this. I mean, the rapidity and succession of war crimes. I mean, the fact that, we lived through the Iraq War, it was such a horrifying crime, such a grievous crime. A million Iraqis dead, all of the Haditha massacre, all these things that happened, Abu Ghraib. It seems like that is happening daily. I don't know what that means. I don't know what kind of new world we are entering into. I understand the conditions that got us here, but it still terrifies me that the war crimes to this extent
Yeah.
daily
We,
have been normalized and actually like are now setting a precedent like this is okay. This is fine. We will continue to protect you.
as we talked about in the last conversation, that's my biggest long-term fear is the desensitization as the destruction of the environment continues, as we'll talk about later with respect to your new film. You're going to have this movement toward civilization, as it were, the wealthier nations, particularly in the West. And if you have that type of mentality against this third party, this xenophobia, and you have seen this violence happen against supposed adversaries of the white Israel. You're looking at a very unique way of getting people to get comfortable with larger order war crimes, or essentially human rights violations, coming from the West as these forces continue. Because the migration crisis hasn't even started as the rest of the world suffers from what we've done to it through pollution and, of course, periodic war and destruction. And, of course, the internal disputes that are fostered because of all the other shenanigans of post-colonial reality. So, and this is not going to change. So that's the most frightening thing to me in the broad scheme. Like, we are conditioning people to be really cold and rough-minded and adversarial. And if we can look the other way on Gaza, what can we look the other way on when it comes to building camps outside the coast of the United States or on the borders of the United States, when it comes to the evil immigrants and the gangs and all the crap that we've developed in the same spirit of that enemy against civilization? Ooh. So it's absolutely a frightening trajectory.
Well, yeah, it's been said many times that Gaza is a test not only for us from the powerful and the rich and the imperialists to say this is what we are willing to do to maintain global supremacy and our hegemony in the Middle East, but it's also a test of our humanity.
Yeah.
It's a mirror. Who are you if you're not moved by Gaza? What are you? And that's the question that we should all ask ourselves, because what I've realized is that we live among, it's not just those in power, it's people in power are human beings, just like the people that surround us. And it's just kind of a lot to take in that we kind of have to take stock of our communities in general. Because it's beyond just who doesn't care. It's a fascist mentality that's kind of taken root that I never saw the reveling of suffering before. And that's something that I am greatly disturbed by. But there's something else that's really fascinating about just Israel in general. I was talking to my friend Abu Bakr, who narrowly escaped the genocide. And he asked me, he just said, Abby, why did it take 75 years for people to realize what Israel was?
Yeah.
And I don't have a good answer for that, because for me, it's the most obvious thing in the world. It's a slow colonization that we've all been, it's an ethnic cleansing that's like slow motion genocide for 75 years. As you mentioned, the Nakba, the 1967 war, the constant eating away at what should have been the future Palestinian state. And Gaza, Jerusalem, I mean, all of it is just so obviously laid bare, but because of the propaganda, it really shows you the nature of the propaganda to twist reality on its head. And people could just lose all common sense, all critical thinking skills, all of their mental faculties go out the window when it comes to this situation. It becomes complicated, it becomes super confusing, and people can't have moral clarity on it when it is the most crystal clear thing in the world.
Yep.
Like,
It's textbook, as we've seen repeated
textbook.
throughout literally thousands of years, too. That's
Right. It's like Christopher Columbus, like going to native people's heads, putting a gun to their head, get out.
Yep.
Textbook ethnic cleansing.
And there's one other factor to this because of how powerful the lobby has been, and the cultural lobby, I'd call it that. I've known people that are of some Jewish relationship or have some family in Israel, and they absolutely agree that this is a horror, but they're terrified to say anything because they're in networks business networks or other kinds of social networks that they know will come down and crush them if they actually say something. And that's fairly new. That's a new thing. And speaking to the groupism and just this bizarre power that the Israeli, again, the Israeli lobby in general, but is also the cultural lobby. I mean, look at the way they obviously they take the universities, they slap an anti-Semitic label on any pro-Palestinian protests, and of course the lunatic executive branch is trying to use that for whatever they possibly can in their defunding of Harvard and all of this insanity. But it builds into that strange cultural apprehension, and that is something relatively new. I don't think I've ever seen that in historical literature.
Oh no, they've really honed in on the propaganda where now, yeah, it's coupling everything together under it's really fascinating because they're using anti-Semitism and the charge of it, but I think it's just a stepping stone to anti-Americanism in general. Like this is the easiest inroad to conflate everything with terrorism sympathizing, anyone who's pro-Palestinian, they want to immediately make that the benchmark, but they want to move the goalpost to make it if you criticize US foreign policy at all, that's a threat. And so you've seen all of it's kind of couched under it's a threat to US foreign policy if you criticize Israel, right? So that synonymous nature of anti-Semitism is like the conflation with support for terrorism. But I do think that this is going to be much more far-reaching and much more widespread. And this is the easiest inroad that they have. And to your point, a lot of people are confused with the tail wagging the dog thing because they look at the lobby and they say, how in the hell is this single issue lobby, which is the biggest, most powerful single issue lobby on the Hill, how does it have so much undue influence of the fact that it's gone and lobbied state legislatures under the guise of anti-Semitism to actually undermine our First Amendment? How is that possible? Because we've emboldened it.
Yeah.
The US has emboldened and subsidized this lobby to such a ridiculous degree that this is what has come back around. And I always tell people, I always go back to that Marco Rubio clip where the Parkland kids are debating him and they're like, stop taking money from the NRA. And he's just like, you think that the NRA pays me to be pro-gun? He's like, no, they buy into my agenda, man. And so all these people who are like, stop taking money from AIPAC, all of the people in Congress are already Zionists. Like you don't get to that position unless you're a true believer in empire, in capitalism, and in Zionism. It's all part of the same project. But it's just fascinating. It's just fascinating because I don't think it starts and stops there. But unfortunately, it's just bred a lot of anti-Semitism because of just how ridiculous this has become.
Yeah. It's like part of these general psychological games, which I want to talk about here as well, in a more tangible sense, such as the ceasefire proposals, which I know that there's one being entertained right now. I know two have been implemented, both, of course, utterly violated by Israel in the truth of the matter, even though you'll see splitting of hairs throughout as they try to continue this anti-Hamas narrative. But what I find most amazing is given the admissions of Israel and the Trump administration stating outright that the assault is not going to end until Hamas is destroyed, once again, as if you can destroy terrorism, these are all abstractions, as if you can destroy resistance in the case of Israel, in the case of Gaza. And of course, coupled with the blatant, now publicly admitted, even though it was all in the archives, plan to annex the entire Gazan region, and of course will lead to the West Bank as well. So then, we see this headline, we see the shit in the media. What's the true point of the ceasefire then? If it's just window dressing, what are they just going to give people a little bit more sustenance, maybe, and so they can endure the final stages of their ethnic cleansing and genocide? Is it just being polite? You see my point, though, the absurdity.
I mean, at the very beginning, the fact that ceasefire was the goal was just such a low. I mean, it was like the lowest possible thing to call for. Stop killing. It's like, first of all, you're conflating both sides, which I disagreed with because it's like I don't want Palestinians to stop firing. They're the ones who are being genocided.
Yes.
But also it's like they have a legal right to resist. They're occupiers. But that's what they wanted. They wanted a cessation to the massacres that were unrelenting.
Oh, absolutely.
And after over a year, Peter, the most basic call wasn't even honored. I mean, it was ignored. It was ridiculed. It was just horrifying to watch a year of just unending slaughter of kids, of babies, and they couldn't even stop. And so, yeah, to have that finally happen in January with Trump, and then the news of Biden coming out and saying, not even once did he even try to say the word ceasefire to Netanyahu, and that they knew they could just go and go and go. The fact that they had the most virulent, unabashed Zionist, proud Zionist, ardent Zionist ever. Biden was the worst possible person to be in office when this all happened
Oh yeah.
because we know how he felt.
Oh yeah.
He was fully gloves off whatever Israel wanted to do. It was just so unbelievable to have it all solidified after the fact to say, nope, Biden really just gave them the green light to do whatever they wanted. We know that he bypassed Congress 100 times to get them arms and secret deals. But how do you explain, I mean, the constant doling out of the ceasefire negotiations? We know from the beginning, as you mentioned, I mean, it was, I think, October 9th, 2023, that Hamas said, I think it was really clear at that point, Israel was going to go full genocidal, and Hamas said, we will give you all the hostages if you do not invade. That was they initially were like, here, don't invade the Gaza Strip and we will hand over all the hostages. That was the initial deal that Hamas offered. Of course, you don't hear anything about that. That was reported in the Times of Israel. So over the course of the next year, it was just Hamas trying to do whatever they could. They barely had any leverage at all because I think they quickly realized that this wasn't going to be the same game as it was 10 years prior when they were able to exchange 1,000 Palestinian hostages for that one Israeli soldier. The Hannibal Directive was employed, and I think they knew, oh God, they are willing to kill all of these hostages. And we're not, we have no leverage at all. So it's been really sad actually to watch Israel just have carte blanche to commit genocide while saying it, Peter, while the Western media lies to us and Western politicians continue to placate us about the nonsense fantasy about a two-state solution as we all witness Gaza be eradicated before our eyes. It is sick. And so to just constantly tease the ceasefire, and Hamas is just, we'll do whatever you want. Here, okay, here, we'll give you the American soldier. Yeah, he's a hostage too. He's not a POW for some reason. Here, we'll give you him. They've tried to do everything in good faith. We all know Israel's the one who lies. They've never upheld any ceasefire resolution. We've seen Israel invade Lebanon. We've seen them bomb Syria. We've seen everything happen around, and then the media still paints it as Hamas is dissolving the ceasefire. It's like, what is Israel doing to every single one of its neighbors?
Yeah, I know.
Bombing, occupying, pursuing the Greater Israel Project, but it just still, we're lied to like children. And so now it's just so sad. This latest round of quote unquote ceasefire negotiations where you have Steve Witkoff, Trump's, Middle East advisor, trying to go over there and negotiate with Hamas. And then Israel tries to tarnish the deal as they always have. They are very angry because Netanyahu has said over and over again, it's not even about the hostages. It's not even about Hamas. It's about Palestinians. It's about taking back Gaza. They want to pretend like it's about Hamas because they know it's an impossible goal. They know that they can never actually take out Hamas because Hamas has said repeatedly, we will relinquish control. We're not going to surrender and lay down our arms. That would be insane and that would be suicide. And if they did that, what's to say that Israel wouldn't come in and just genocide everyone? They're the only ones standing in between mass graves and the Israeli soldiers right now, our resistance groups like Hamas and Islamic Jihad and PFLP and DFLP. So it is absolutely insane. But they have said multiple times, we don't want to control the Gaza Strip anymore. We have had no choice because of the conditions that we've been put in for the last 15 years, this medieval siege, the fact that you have an Israeli puppet, Mahmoud Abbas, controlling the West Bank. None of this is fair and free. We can't have fair, impartial elections with this kind of stifling military control, impeding our self-determination. And so they've said multiple times, we don't even really want to be the government. We are willing to step aside. So all of this has gone by the wayside, Peter. No one entertains this at all. It's just constantly dehumanization of Palestinians. And then for some reason, it's turned into such a dehumanization of Hamas that they've openly said they're going to go over after all Hamas civilian infrastructure. As we know, I mean, that's water workers, that's people who pick up the garbage, that's the mailman. I mean, that's pretty much everyone in Gaza who had any sort of civilian job.
Yeah, it's carte blanche. Anything that they can pin to anything that's related to the H word is now on the chopping block. And of course, it doesn't even matter, though, as you pointed out earlier. It doesn't matter what Hamas does. It's all a ploy. And I wish of all the things that people could understand about this, because that is probably the largest propagandized driver. If I see one more person on social media say, why won't Hamas just release the hostages? Like, Jesus, how can you not recognize?
It's like, what? Just stop hitting yourself. Why are you? It's like, and it's like, what do you mean release the hostages? It's like,
And
what
but and
do you
even
really
more.
think that they would stop doing
That's the
this?
point. Yeah, it's like incredible too because they've even stated it. Like it's as if the news media, even whatever CNN, can't they just report on what's being stated in the bowels of Israel? It's been stated over and over again that this will be a literal ethnic cleansing. And speaking of this, there's another game, if we want to call it, and probably a terrible distinction of the word, but this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation that's just arisen, which I guess is what it appears to be is an attempt to override UN true aid functions and bring in this US backed, CIA led, or former CIA agent, but we all know it never leaves the agency, Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, that they're pulling people down south now. What is your view of this strategy? Because obviously it's not about aid, it's about something else.
Yes, and for as long as the genocide has been ongoing, they have constantly corralled Palestinians into these so-called humanitarian corridors and quote unquote safe zones, which are really just killing zones and more death traps. And what this is just a new ploy because, as we know, for since since the reinitiation of the genocide after the initial ceasefire, they have cut off all water, all aid, all, everything was cut off in a complete and total siege of Gaza, not 1 ounce of baby formula. We know that dozens and dozens of civilians have died through starvation, dehydration, curable illnesses, obviously, that could have been solved through just basic medication. So this has been a horrific situation. The world has been watching 1 million children starve to death, images of the Holocaust. So Netanyahu basically said in a press release, as you mentioned, they say all of this plainly. This wasn't just some leaked internal like phone call like Victoria Nuland. Like this was literally Netanyahu giving a press release saying, look, I have Republican senators coming to me saying, we support Israel with all our hearts. Here's the thing, Netanyahu. We can't just stand by and have photos of like starving babies come out and still give you everything you want. So can you at least just pretend like you're dealing with the starvation thing? And so Netanyahu's saying all this like on camera. He's like, look, they're coming to me being like, we want to give you what we want to do whatever you want to do, but we can't in good conscience tell our constituents like we let babies starve. So can you at least just pretend that there's some sort of aid scheme? He said this. And so to solve the problem, Peter, he got the CIA cutout with also ties to Mossad, um, former Blackwater folks who have an Arabic accent. They're coming straight from killing people in Iraq, probably coming just straight to this distribution center. What it is, everyone can see the photos. It is literally just, again, worse than like factory farming lines of cattle, corralling Palestinians in the blazing sun, no food, no water. I mean, these people are waiting for hours on end into tiny single file lines and like throwing them scraps of food. There's no baby formula. There is no medicine. It's scraps of food, like dogs, like dogs. And what they're doing is biometric surveillance technology to minority report everyone's face to say, oh, are you affiliated with Hamas? Okay, if you're not, here's a scrap, a morsel of food. And then the people who are running their stampedes, they've killed 30 people already trying to get food. This is sick. It is so beyond sick. Every day I wonder how can it get more disturbing?
Yeah, right.
And so this is what we're watching now, Peter.
Yeah. It's mind blowing. And the fact that this kind of thing is actually being condemned by major institutions like the UN and whatnot. I mean, shit. Israel has more war crime accusations and documentation than literally probably anything we've seen in the past 100 years, if you were to compare compare the charges. And yet, again, no sanctions, nothing. And even this kind of ruse that they're putting forward, it's the outcry's there.
That's what's so curious about it. And I forgot to actually say that this whole scheme, this aid scheme, is actually designed to lure, trap, and then kill the Palestinians who they deem like politically unsavory. So all of this is tricking Palestinians into basically just kill boxes for these menial food scraps. It is sick and sadistic beyond recognition and so reprehensible, Peter. But to your point about the sanctions, I mean, after the ICJ ruling, I was, it was amazing to see on a global stage because Israel's been experiencing and enjoying impunity for its entire colonial existence. I mean, they are like a colony an apartheid colony. And so it was incredible to at least see that kind of historical watershed moment being like finally global institution that we all herald as like this beacon of whatever human rights is finally calling them out on a global stage saying they're committing genocide. That was amazing. And then we just saw what happened afterward. It was like Netanyahu was able to fly all over the world. You have world leaders condemning Israel, giving the obligatory disapproval of starving babies and mass murdering humans daily, but then there's nothing done. There's just rhetoric. We saw even Spain was still delivering like arms shipments, like transferring actual products to help facilitate the genocide. You see the UK, look at Under Starmer. I mean, this is the Labour Party guy who is sending spy planes daily from Cyprus to gather intel into Gaza.
Yep.
All of these people are war criminals who are complicit in the genocide. It's so far beyond just, oh, they're not sanctioning them. They are all actively doing this. The only thing that I can think of is the US has that much control. We don't want to face it. We don't want to really face that we are under like a global military dictatorship under one state.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we are. And I think that this has really proven that. The amount of terror and fear that the United States empire has put into the rest of the world has resulted in this, Peter, an apocalypse that no one can do anything about because they are terrified of what the US is going to do to them. And it's a sick, pathetic display, isn't it?
Really brings it all to the surface. Even U.S. software companies helping with the artificial intelligence that they're using to basically indiscriminately bomb, but they hide behind the artificial intelligence and whatnot. And going back to what you said about that new humanitarian fund, just before I forget, there's some analysts think that they're corralling everybody to southern Gaza, of course, to annex initially northern Gaza, and then once everyone's barricaded in southern Gaza, those that they don't kill, they'll finally be able to cart off to some other poor nation that, for whatever reason, will accept them under, once again, the pressure of the bullying United States. By the way, do you think that's something that we can expect to see actual movement of Palestinians outside relatively soon?
Well, that was part of this whole aid distribution scheme was Netanyahu's calling Trump's plan revolutionary, the plan for Libya to actually be forced to take 1 million people in this forced transfer, which is so sick as just a commentary, isn't it? After getting completely destroyed.
As if Libya has the resources. That's just a complete humanitarian nightmare by extension, as we could all expect. Jesus Christ.
I mean, the thing is, I think that they're trying to kill as many as they can. And then once it becomes so untenable, I mean, you see kind of a shift rhetorically, not with obviously anything tangible, but rhetorically, people are really throwing Netanyahu into the bus because they really want to preserve their military garrison. And so all of these Western leaders are like, we're willing to throw Netanyahu to the wolves, potentially even the Hague, ultimately, if we can wash our hands of Gaza, rehabilitate our apartheid colony, and just move forward. And I think they're just buying enough time to do that.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, I could see that, especially with all the criminal accusations against Netanyahu. It's almost like he's prepared for the fall one way or another, which would be both satisfying and, of course, the scapegoatism would be a disaster in the way you describe it, as if you just shift leaders and suddenly everything's fine. And that's, same with George W. Bush in Iraq and everything else. That's one of the standards.
Well, they're pretending like he's an aberration, just like Trump.
Right.
And we know that Trump is the perfect outgrowth of our society, exactly the same way as Netanyahu. I mean, you look at polling that was just done from UPenn. It's absolutely terrifying. The genocidal mania that's taken hold of Israeli society is unfixable internally. It's something that requires boycott, divestment, sanctions from the outside because there's no hope from within a society that far gone.
I can't believe any human being, regardless of their belief structure, could fall victim. But then again, you look at Nazi Germany.
Fear.
People forget.
Fear.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, the groupism. There's that nasty.
And they genuinely think Palestinians want to kill them. I mean, that I only, I don't think look, I never believed in evil before. I think that there's definitely capacity for the lack of empathy and like the banality of evil thing. But look, there is something to be said about that psychological manipulation of Israeli society from cradle to grave. There's something there that you have to be terrified existentially. Like I know Israelis don't even travel to the West Bank. They never even interact with Palestinians. I've talked to several Israeli Jews who are like, we don't talk to Palestinians. We talk to them when they're serving us food. Like we don't integrate with these people. And that's, yeah, so it's completely isolated
Yeah.
and segregated 100%.
Oh yeah, Oh yeah, when I was there, even many many years ago, I couldn't believe the segregation, the checkpoints, as you are very familiar with. So this pattern is just long enduring, and yeah, just like Nazi Germany, you couldn't have that type of behavior without the passivity and ultimately the favor of the general population and the majority. And I want to shift gears a little bit because I think it falls in with your new project, Earth's Greatest Enemy. I know you've produced this film. It's been a couple years in the making. Is that right? I mean,
Hmm.
it's been a while.
Almost five.
Yeah, can't wait to see it. I think there's some theatrical things happening, which we can talk about too. There's such an important, large scale process of influence that's happening on this planet. And as we touched upon earlier, the environmental crisis and the climate crisis, all of these things is just fuel for all of the other levels of aggression, war, insanity. And that's what we can expect. Do you talk about this in that film at all?
Oh, just the fossil fuel infrastructure, capitalism, maintenance, and how it all started and is maintained. Yeah, I mean, look, the fact, the point, and the reason that all this is happening is, as you know, I mean, the economic structure, and the primary protector and enforcer of that structure is the U.S. military.
Yeah.
And so it absolutely is unpacked because you cannot just look at the symptom. I mean, you have to go to the root. And so it's a tough conversation to have because you have to keep unpacking how we got here, and people don't want to face that. I mean, I barely even hear people talk about the reality of climate change today. And I think that's because it's really hard to face. It's really hard to face our reality. I'm the type of person who I need to look at things wide-eyed and clear-eyed. I need to see exactly what we're up against. It's not necessarily demoralizing to me, it's enlightening and empowering because then I know what needs to be said and done. I don't want to look at anything with rose-colored glasses. And so this film, it's a tough watch, but I think it's a necessary one.
I'm sure it will have a very positive influence. Going back to climate change in terms of this kind of narrative structure and the propaganda, just like the all the nonsense with how people in the West, excuse me, view Hamas and Israel and the whole dispute. Climate change is another completely saturated subject with huge disinformation going back many, many decades in favor, of course, the fossil fuel industry, and by extension, as I'm sure you touch upon, the military industrial complex at large. There's a huge interconnection between the hydrocarbon industry and the way these institutions have to function. And to lose that actually would be a game changer if we actually move to renewables and things of that nature, particularly making countries self sustainable through renewable means. So there's this interesting web to that. And I think that's a really important subject. So if you wouldn't mind for the audience, just kind of
Yeah.
run down what this film, without giving it away, no spoilers, but run down what this film essentially outlines and the fundamental argument that you put forward.
Yeah, so I want to touch upon the fossil fuel infrastructure and the maintenance of that and why there's so many bases around the world to prop that system up, Peter. But just the main thesis and premise of the film is tackling that gargantuan fact that probably your audience has heard piecemeal, which is the US military is the largest institutional polluter on the planet, the Pentagon. And so I first heard that kind of milling around about 7 years ago in a couple academic journals and studies, and it would be like a headline here and there, the US military is a larger polluter than 140 countries. Sounds crazy, right? And then you realize that the US military is that big of a polluter because of its oil purchases just on paper. Just the purchases. See, they don't calculate anything with emissions. That's all under the guise of national security. So
Right.
all of these global climate treaties, the COP, we're at what, COP 29 now? For the last 29 years, ever since Kyoto, the US military has basically exempted itself, and all other countries have followed suit. So no emissions from the US military are counted in any of these global climate treaty totals. And so we actually have no idea what we're talking about when we talk about net zero by 2050, this and that. And of course, the whole COP thing is a farce anyway. There's more fossil fuel lobbyists there than any other country's delegation. But when I found that out, we went into this film just wanting to calculate that. We wanted to quantify how many emissions are we talking about just from the Pentagon. And of course, the Pentagon's not a force in isolation. You have to bring in NATO. and NATO becomes another political beast because of this whole demand to buy U.S. weaponry. It's unbelievable, and it's another kind of farce and front for U.S. military power to pretend like there's some sort of global cooperation with the empire, and it's not just completely engineering everything itself. So we went into that just wanting to unpack that. But every stone we turned over became another topic. Peter, as you know, I mean, your reflections, it's a beast, and you have this idea, but when you don't have the beginning and the end, you realize every topic is another documentary. And so what this film turned into was basically the totality of military pollution. So it became something so much bigger than just emissions. We're talking about military toxic dumping, just the arsenal alone. I mean, having such an outrageous amount of military equipment that dwarfs every other nation combined, just the chemicals that are used to clean the engines and the arsenal is creating so much toxic waste and dumping and pollution of water supplies, the PFAS contamination, the VOCs. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. Then you look at the sacrifice zones. Every single base is a dumping ground, is a sacrifice zone for the indigenous people and the veterans who live on it. And so the film tells these stories. It kind of tells 20 different topics within the giant umbrella of proving the fact that the US military is indeed Earth's greatest enemy for a myriad of reasons. It's not just what I talked about, it's obviously the effects of war, which are totally unquantifiable. I mean, look at Gaza alone, the blowing up of all of that concrete, the rebuilding, the toxic fallout of the munitions. A lot of people just talk about depleted uranium, but actually the most highly toxic carcinogen is just from bullets. And there's estimations that every person who died in Iraq, like 140,000 bullets were used. So we're talking about generational impacts that are beyond comprehension, that are going to be millennia of poison fallout from all of the war and the death and destruction that's caused. I mean, ecocide was brought up because of our behavior in Vietnam. So this film is a one-stop shop. Similarly to Gaza Fights for Freedom, I wanted to make an unapologetic film that proves my thesis that can be used as an educational tool to solidify all of these seemingly disparate struggles around the world, whether it's immigration or the economy here or, Gaza. All of these things have one common cause, Peter, and that's capitalism and by extension, imperialism.
We're fueling literally this violent machine through one of the most unsustainable practices built into a war economy. And of course, as you just touched upon, it builds back into this growth ethic and all the sicknesses of the incentive and the requirements of essentially market capitalism, just spiraling. I don't know, Abby, do you, what a, grab my noose or my shotgun now? I'm like,
There's a beautiful thing about it, and that's the love and the people that you meet. And, like you, Peter, I mean, I love you, you're my brother. And the thing is, I wouldn't know you if I wasn't actively engaged in this whole movement. And that's kind of a beautiful thing. I wouldn't know my husband, I wouldn't have my family. And so when you choose to be involved, when you choose to be engaged, there's something that actually is opened up. And that's the essence of our humanity. And it's the driving force of what makes us human beings, Peter. That's what this really is. And so
yeah.
there's something that's kind of, it just feels very raw because it's very emotional and intense, all of this. But traveling around to Guam, Alaska, and Okinawa and seeing the activists for decades, no fanfare, no headlines. They're not on Twitter. They're not on TikTok. They are there day in and day out trying to put their bodies
Yeah.
in front of the gears to just slow down construction from this new Marine base. They haven't given up.
Yep.
So why the hell should I?
Absolutely. Beautiful souls like yourself and this general community, they were basically trying to remind people of what humanity actually is. The core of our sensibility, I think, gravitates towards a very loving and peaceful nature. It's just generations of extreme corrupt social system behavior and group identification, all this neuroses, and we have to break out of that. So we're all agents of evolution, as I would use the old Bill Hicks term, right? So I commend you very much, Abby, and I really appreciate you coming on. It's always an honor, and I'll have you back on very soon. And I cannot wait to see the film. Please rattle off anything people can go to see more of your work with Empire Files, and where they can see your new film when I think you're going on tour with it, aren't you?
I am. Yeah, I'd love your opinion on it, Peter, so you can tell me if it's good or not. EarthsGreatestEnemy.com. Check it out. We're going on a big film tour later this year. I'd love to see all of you there. And Peter, I'd love to come visit you and check it out. Thank you so much. It was such an honor, seriously, for you to have me on. You're my hero and inspiration. So it's wonderful to talk to you.
The heroine hero relationship is always mutual. We're all doing our best. But thank you. I appreciate that very much, Abby. Well, good luck on your travels, and we'll talk very soon.
Okay, bye.
Bye.